It was supposed to be an easy ride. I'd been hitchhiking for years, ever since I was 16, and decided that life at home wasn't worth sticking around for. You get good at it after a while, reading people, trusting instincts. Most folks just want company for a few miles, someone to keep them awake on long, empty highways. But every once in a while you get a bad feeling. That gut-level warning that tells you not this car, not this driver. And if you're smart, you listen. I should have listened. It was late. Later than I like to be out waiting for a ride. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your clothes cling to your skin like a second layer. My last ride had left me at a gas station just outside a town called Bellwood. A speck on the map with one streetlight and a diner that smelled like burnt coffee. The highway stretched into nothingness, swallowed by the night. That's when I saw the headlights. An old Ford pickup, the kind that had seen better decades, rolled to a slow stop a few feet ahead of me. The engine idled low and steady. The driver leaned over and popped the door open. No hesitation, just a silent invitation. I hesitated. The man inside was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. He had that trucker look, stubble, baseball cap, heavyset build. His eyes were shadowed beneath the brim, unreadable in the dim light from the dashboard. "Where you headed?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he'd smoked a pack a day since birth. I glanced down the road, empty in both directions. No other cars, no other options. "South," I said. "As far as you're going." He nodded once, like that was answer enough. "Get in." And against every instinct screaming at me, I did. The door shut with a solid clunk, sealing me inside. The cab smelled like old leather, engine grease, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something stale. The kind of smell that lingers in a truck that's been driven too many miles with too few stops. The man shifted into gear, and we rolled forward, the highway swallowing us in darkness. For a while, we didn't talk. That was fine by me. Some drivers liked conversation, others didn't. I could adapt, but I kept my guard up. A couple of miles passed before he finally spoke. "What's your name?" I hesitated. I never gave my real name to strangers. "Luke," I said. "Close enough." He nodded, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. "Where you from, Luke?" "Nowhere, really. Just passing through." Silence again. The kind that makes you more aware of how fast your heart is beating. Then he said, "You been hitchhiking long?" Now, that was an interesting question. Most drivers don't ask that. They assume it's just a one-time thing, bad luck, a broken-down car, whatever. "Yeah," I admitted. "A while." "Huh." He chewed on that for a second, then glanced at me for the first time since I got in. Just a quick flick of the eyes before returning to the road. "Ever had a bad ride?" he asked. That was the moment my skin prickled. Something in the way he said it, casual, like small talk, but with too much weight behind it. "Yeah," I said carefully. "Couple of close calls." He smiled, just a little, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I bet," he muttered. I stared at him, at his hands gripping the wheel, at the way he tapped his fingers, not to music, not out of habit. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like counting, and suddenly, I had a very bad feeling about this ride. The highway stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark. The truck's headlights barely made a dent in the emptiness, illuminating only the cracked road and the occasional reflector post flashing by like ghostly sentinels. I kept my eyes forward, listening to the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of tires against pavement. The man beside me didn't say much after that last exchange, but I could feel him thinking. There was something deliberate about the way he drove, never too fast, never too slow. His grip on the wheel was firm, steady, too controlled. I'd ridden with plenty of drivers before, but this was different. There was an awareness to him, like he was waiting for something. I adjusted in my seat, feeling the stiff vinyl against my back. The cab was stuffy, despite the night air seeping through the cracked window. The smell inside was stronger now, something old and metallic. Not quite rust, not quite sweat. I tried to ignore it. The dashboard glowed a dim orange, illuminating the man's face in sharp relief. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few minutes, like he was watching for something. Or someone. I turned my head slightly, glancing into the side mirror. The road behind us was empty. No headlights, no taillights, just blackness. Still, he checked. Again and again. Something wasn't right. I shifted my backpack onto my lap. An old habit from years on the road. Keep your belongings close. Keep an exit plan closer. My left hand found the door handle, testing it, unlocked. That was good. A mile marker flashed past. No town names, just numbers. No way to tell how far we were from anything. The man exhaled sharply, almost like a sigh. Then he reached down and adjusted something beneath his seat. I couldn't see what it was. I didn't like that. I kept my breathing steady, my body still, the way an animal does when it knows it's being watched. Outside, the dark stretched on, and the road ahead felt longer than it should. The farther we drove, the more I became aware of just how alone we were. No gas stations, no highway signs, no turnoffs. Just a two-lane road cutting through the dark. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen another car. The truck's tires hummed steadily against the asphalt. But inside the cab, the silence had changed. It wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the kind that waited. I kept my eyes forward, watching the road, but I could feel the driver's gaze flicking toward me every so often. Not obvious, not long, just quick, measuring glances. The kind that sized you up. He shifted in his seat again, adjusting something near his leg. A dull clink sounded beneath him, metal against metal. It was soft, but I heard it. And now I knew. A weapon. A knife? A gun? I didn't know, and I wasn't about to ask. But I'd been on the road long enough to understand one thing. If someone wants you afraid, they'll let you know. If they don't, it's because they don't want you to run. I kept my posture relaxed, forcing my breathing to stay even. My fingers curled around the strap of my backpack, knuckles pressing against the fabric. My left hand stayed near the door handle. Up ahead, a small green sign appeared on the shoulder. A town name. I squinted, trying to make it out in the dark. Clearwater, 12 miles. 12 miles. I could work with that. If I had to, I could jump, tuck and roll, take my chances in the trees. It wouldn't be my first rough exit from a bad ride. The man cleared his throat, breaking the silence. He reached for the radio, twisting the knob. Static filled the cab. No stations. No sound but the broken hiss of dead air. He left it on anyway. We drove on, the sign disappearing behind us. 12 miles. I just had to make it 12 miles. Something was wrong. Clearwater was 12 miles from where I got in the truck. At this speed, we should have been close by now. Maybe 5 minutes out, maybe less. But the road stretched ahead, empty and endless, without a single sign to tell me how much farther we had to go. I kept my breathing steady, but my pulse had started to pick up. Where were the mile markers? They'd been there before. I was sure of it. Small green signs, reflective in the headlights, ticking down the distance. But for the last several miles, I hadn't seen a single one. I glanced at the speedometer. Just under 50. We hadn't slowed down. We hadn't turned off. The road was still the same. So why weren't we there yet? The driver exhaled through his nose, a slow, deliberate sound. His fingers tapped the wheel, same rhythm as before. 3 beats. A pause. 3 beats again. It wasn't nervous energy. It was counting. For what? I didn't know. I shifted slightly, just enough to test the door handle again. Still unlocked. Good. Outside, the dark pressed in, thick and impenetrable. No houses, no lights. Just the hum of the engine and the slap of the tires against the road. Then the driver spoke. Funny thing about these highways. His voice was rough, coated with something unreadable. You think you're headed one place. Then you realize you've been driving a lot longer than you thought. I didn't answer, didn't move, just kept my breathing steady, like a rabbit that knows it's already caught. And up ahead, there was still no sign of Clearwater. I spotted it too late. A break in the trees, a narrow dirt road veering off to the right, almost invisible in the dark. The truck's blinker didn't come on. No hesitation. No slow approach. Just a sharp, deliberate turn, tires crunching against gravel as we left the highway behind. My stomach dropped. This wasn't Clearwater. I gripped my backpack tighter, forcing my voice to stay calm. This a shortcut? The driver didn't answer right away. He just kept his hands on the wheel, knuckles pale in the dim dashboard light. Then, after a long moment, he let out a small chuckle. Something like that. The road was rough, bumping us side to side. Trees loomed close, branches clawing at the truck as we moved deeper into nowhere. No streetlights, no other cars, just thick woods swallowing us whole. I kept my posture relaxed, but my mind was racing. He'd made sure I never saw Clearwater. And now we were off the map entirely. This is it. Every instinct screamed at me, move, now. But I had to be smart. No sudden movements, no panic. If he had a weapon, I needed to know where it was before I made my move. The truck rumbled forward, headlights bouncing over uneven ground. Deeper, farther. No way this was a shortcut. Then I saw his right hand shift, just slightly, toward something beside his seat. I didn't wait. My fingers wrapped around the door handle. I twisted, pushed, and threw myself into the dark. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Gravel tore at my palms as I tumbled, rolling hard down the embankment. Rocks, dirt, and dead leaves scraped against my skin, but I barely felt it. My body knew better than my mind. Get up, keep moving. Somewhere above me, the truck's tires screeched against the loose gravel. The engine roared as it skidded to a stop. He's coming. I forced myself to my feet, lungs burning, legs shaky beneath me. My backpack was gone, ripped from my grasp when I hit the ground, but there was no time to go back for it. I ran. The trees swallowed me whole, branches whipping against my arms as I tore through the undergrowth. My breath came fast, too loud in the silence of the woods. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Behind me, a car door slammed. Then footsteps, fast, heavy, coming after me. I pushed harder, ignoring the pain, the scratches, the way my vision blurred with sweat and panic. My boots pounded against the soft earth, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then I heard his voice, not yelling, not angry, just amused. You shouldn't have done that, Luke. I ran faster. Branches snapped behind me. Close, too close. I didn't dare look back. I knew what I'd see. His hulking frame moving fast, faster than a man his size should, closing the gap between us. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I kept going. The trees were thick, the ground uneven. Roots jutted up from the dirt, reaching for my ankles like traps. I leapt over them, pushed through the undergrowth, my arms stinging where the branches tore at my skin. The footsteps behind me never wavered. A low chuckle drifted through the trees. He wasn't even winded. You can run, kid, he called, voice smooth, almost playful. But you ain't gonna make it far. I ignored him, focused ahead. I needed something. A road, a house, a break in the trees. Anything. Then, out of nowhere, a clearing. The forest opened up to a rocky slope leading downward. At the bottom, I saw it. A river. Wide, dark, moving fast. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself down the slope, half running, half sliding, dirt and loose stone tumbling ahead of me. My balance wavered, but I didn't slow down. The water was my only chance. Behind me, the man growled in frustration. His pace quickened. I reached the bottom and ran straight for the river's edge. The current was stronger than I expected, churning like black oil under the moonlight. Cold, dangerous, but it didn't matter, because behind me he was almost here. I took one breath, then I dove in. The cold was a shock, knocking the air from my lungs the second I hit the water. The current yanked me under, spinning me sideways, pulling me into its depths. Rocks scraped against my legs as I fought to surface, my arms thrashing against the relentless pull. Above me, I heard shouting, but I couldn't tell if it was anger or laughter. Maybe both. Then a splash. He was coming in after me. Panic surged through me, but I forced it down. think, move, survive. The current was strong, but I angled my body, kicking hard, letting it carry me downstream instead of fighting against it. The river twisted through the landscape, disappearing into the trees. If I could just stay afloat, keep going, I could put distance between us. But the water was like ice, sapping the strength from my limbs with every second. My muscles ached, my clothes heavy, dragging me down. I turned my head, trying to see through the churning dark. No sign of him, no sound but the roar of the water in my ears. Had he gone under, or was he still coming? A burst of adrenaline shot through me, and I kicked harder. Don't stop. The river was carrying me fast, but I needed a way out. My head snapped from side to side, scanning the banks for anything. A low branch, a break in the trees, somewhere to pull myself free before the cold took me down for good. Then I saw it. A fallen tree stretched across part of the river ahead, its thick, gnarled roots reaching toward the rushing water. It was my only shot. I forced my numb arms to move, angling toward it, kicking with everything I had left. The current fought me, trying to drag me farther downstream. But I reached out, missed. The river pulled me past, yanking me under for a second before I surfaced again. Gasping. I had one more chance. I threw myself forward, lunging for a root jutting out from the water. My fingers scraped against bark, slipping, then catching. With the last of my strength, I pulled. My body slammed against the tree, water roaring around me. I clung to it, coughing, shaking, dragging myself upward. Then, as I turned my head, I saw him, a few feet away, bobbing in the current. His face barely visible above the water, his arms thrashing. And then he went under. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just watched. The water where he'd gone under rippled and churned, but he didn't come back up. No gasping for air, no clawing at the surface. Just dark water swallowing him whole. The current kept pushing downstream, but he was gone. I stayed frozen against the tree, my body shaking from exhaustion and cold. My mind screamed at me to run, to put as much distance between me and this place as possible. But I couldn't move. Not yet. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Full minute. Nothing. Slowly, I pulled myself the rest of the way up, onto the thick, wet trunk. My arms barely had strength left, but I forced myself forward, inch by inch, until I reached the riverbank. I collapsed onto the dirt, chest heaving, eyes locked on the water. Still nothing. It was over. The weight of it hit me all at once. My body ached. My clothes were soaked. My hands scraped raw. But I was alive. Somehow, against all odds, I was alive. I didn't stay long. Once my legs could hold me, I got up and started walking. The trees loomed around me, the forest thick and unfamiliar, but I followed the river. Rivers lead to towns. Towns have people. I just had to keep moving. I walked for miles. The sun started creeping up by the time I saw a road. Not a highway, just a cracked, 2-lane stretch of asphalt winding through the trees. But it was enough. And then, in the distance, headlights. A car. I stepped onto the shoulder, raising a shaking hand. My clothes were torn. My face must have looked like hell, but the driver slowed, pulling up beside me. The window rolled down, and an older man squinted at me from behind the wheel. "Jesus, kid," he muttered. "You all right?" I swallowed, my throat raw, my voice barely working. "Yeah," I rasped. "Just need a ride." He hesitated, but then nodded. "Hop in." I opened the door, sliding into the passenger seat. The warmth of the car was overwhelming, and for the first time since I'd hit the water, I let myself breathe. As we pulled away, I glanced back one last time. The woods stood still, silent, and the river kept moving, carrying its secrets downstream. The ride to town was quiet. The driver didn't ask many questions, and I didn't offer any answers. Maybe he could tell I wasn't in the mood to talk, or maybe he'd picked up hitchhikers before. People who looked like they'd been through something and just needed a ride, no questions asked. The road signs told me we were heading toward Clearwater, the place I was supposed to reach hours ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the time we hit the outskirts of town, The sky was a dull gray, the sun barely creeping over the horizon. The driver dropped me off near a motel, one of those roadside places with flickering neon signs and a front desk that smelled like stale cigarettes. It wasn't much, but it was exactly what I needed. "Take care of yourself, kid," the driver said before pulling away. I stood there for a moment watching his taillights disappear. Then I turned and headed inside. The guy at the front desk barely looked at me as I paid for a room. Cash, as always. No ID. No names. Just a key slid across the counter and a room number muttered under his breath. I locked the door the second I stepped inside. The room was small. Stiff bed, buzzing lamp, old TV that probably didn't work. But it had a lock. And right now, that was all I cared about. I peeled off my soaked clothes, my body aching from the night before. Scrapes and bruises covered my arms. My ribs throbbed from the fall, and my hands were raw from clawing my way out of the river. But I was alive. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my mind still replaying the last few hours. The truck, the missing mile markers, the way he looked at me, and the river. How long before someone found him? If they ever did. I exhaled, long and slow. I'd been on the road for years, seen my share of bad rides. But this one was different. I wasn't sure why I was still alive. Maybe I got lucky. Maybe he got unlucky. Either way, I knew one thing. I wasn't hitchhiking anymore. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of cars on the highway. For the first time in a long time, I let my eyes close, and I slept.